Now that we've seen how to make a very basic text field and a button, we haven't learned checkboxes or anything like that yet, but we have at least two different things we can populate a form with, a text field and a button. Now let's talk about the overarching form element. So there is an element called form. I showed an example in the previous video on GitHub. This whole thing is wrapped in an element, if I inspect, called form. You can see right there. Opening tag, and here's the closing tag. And inside of it, there's things like inputs and buttons and labels, which we have yet to discuss as well. So what is the purpose of an overall form element? If I make a form element, I'll just put one in here, form, opening and closing tag, and I save. Where's my web page? Here it is. We won't see a thing. It doesn't show up as a form, but it has a very important purpose. It groups together our different form controls. So we might have, a checkout form that has 10 different fields, your address, your credit card information, your name, your email, your password. A form element groups it together, and then it specifies to the browser where the data from the form fields should be sent when the form is submitted. So when I have a form, that data is typically going to go somewhere. And it's kind of beyond the scope of what we need in this course, because to handle a form submission, you need some sort of server setup. You typically will have an API, a backend essentially with a database. We're not covering any of that. So we're going to learn how to make the forms, how to build the front end. But when we submit them, they won't do anything. We won't be, charging someone money or signing them up or signing them in to a website. We'll be sending their data off basically into the ether, into nowhere. But I need you to understand, well, that's a little strong to say I need you, but it's important that you understand what a form element does. It will send data somewhere. So if we look at this GitHub form right here, I'll go back to the inspect. Here's the form. It has this very special attribute called action. Action is what we use to tell the form where the data should be sent. When somebody clicks submit or sign up or whatever the button is to submit the form, send the data to this location. And then we have this second attribute. We won't go into too much detail, but it's called method. This allows us to specify what type of HTTP request should be sent by the form. Now, please remember, this is a course on CSS and styling. It does not really matter if you understand HTTP verbs, get and post and all of that stuff. If you've never heard about them, don't worry. It has no bearing on the projects and the content in this course. But just to be comprehensive, I'll tell you about it in a couple of sentences. HTTP has different types of requests that we can make that have different purposes. So to the same URL, the same location, in this case /signup, we can send a GET request, which has one particular meaning. It basically means we're trying to retrieve information, or a POST request, which means typically that we're trying to submit data that will be saved or used in some way on the back end. There's patch and put and deletes, lots of different types of requests. So to the same location, we can send a different type of a request. If we look at this GitHub form, it has method set to post, so it's sending a post request. Don't worry exactly what that does, what it means. I cover this sort of content when we start building a backend in order to receive these requests and respond to them, but we're not doing that in this course. So all you really need to know is that if I wrap my content in a form element, I can then specify an action attribute that says where the data should be sent, and a method attribute that says how it should be sent, what HTTP type of request, what verb should be used. So let me demonstrate on our example, our first web page. Let's get rid of all of these buttons, and let's put these two form controls inside of a form element. So a single text field and then a button. And I'm going to just change the text of this button to say submit. What happens when we have a button at the end of a form is that when we click it, the form will be submitted. And we'll be able to watch this happen. If you watch me click this right here, I'll try and zoom in post-production, you'll see that the page refreshes. It happened very quickly, but the page did refresh, which tells us an HTTP request was in fact made. So if I specify my own action on this form, action equals, and I'll just do some other website, This is where my data is sent. How about just google.com? If I refresh the page now and I submit this form, it takes me to Google. So that's proof that the form is doing something. Of course, normally this would be sending the data somewhere that you control. You're not sending data to Google. And by the way, it's not like Google is taking our information from this or anything. We're just sending it to the homepage. It's not expecting any data from us, so it just kind of disappears. It's not used at all. However, normally we would have our data go to like an endpoint that we created on the back end, /login or checkout or something like that, register, whatever we want. We would have it set up to handle a submission, to be expecting data to be sent its way and then respond with some sort of web page. But we don't have that. So for now, by setting it to Google, it's proof that our data is going somewhere. But for now, I'll leave it as Google because it does demonstrate the fact that our form is being submitted and the form element is dictating where a request should be sent to. In this case, it happens to be to google.com, which doesn't make any sense. All right. So we have a lot more to learn with forms, but the basic concept here is that a form element on its own is just an empty thing. It doesn't look like anything at all, but we fill it with different form inputs or controls. So you could have, an email field, a password field, a checkbox to confirm that you are over 18 or something like that. And then the form says where the data will go. And then when the form is submitted, which in our case happens because we have a button at the end of the form, that submits the form and a request is then generated to this location.